welcome back to Timberborn and the settlement of the Skyborn. My name is Zedek, and I am building a skyscraper city. We're about mid-game right now, and we are getting to the point where we can start building all sorts of crazy things. Last episode, I just finished building the powerhouse. This ridiculous-looking vertical power plant that is powered by bad water and is going to power the rest of probably this playthrough. This episode, however, what I really want to start doing is building more towers. And I want to start with some tree farms. So if you're new to this playthrough, you can see I'm playing the ancient Waterways map, which kind of naturally divides this map into 4 sections. And I'm kind of theming each of these sections. You can see on the left, that's going to be Old Town, which is just going to be haphazard. We've got Industrial in the top left, our farming in the right, and then kind of the bottom right, I haven't really decided what it's going to be yet. Now, I would really like to start developing this more into skyscrapers, but there's a few things that are holding me back. First is trees. I know I stockpile a lot, but I burn through them very quickly as soon as I start building giant structures. And the second is real estate. Like, right now, I'm using most of the flat land for either agriculture or trees, and if I take it away for a skyscraper, I lose that. With that in mind, what I really want to start playing with in this episode is using 3D dirt to start taking some of our farms vertical. That way I can kind of combine both issues. I get a new skyscraper out of it, plus I can reclaim a bunch of land for some new things. So I'm currently playing on the experimental branch, and it includes 3D dirt. And I think that's going to be vital to whatever towers I come up with agriculture, because that's going to allow things to be irrigated. Now 3D dirt though, it also has some really interesting building properties. One of the things that I really like is that as you build up, you now have the option of building sideways, and you can go up to 3 in either direction, which itself is really powerful in the sense that I can make it actually symmetrical. That's something that's always really bothered me when I do regular platforms. You notice if you go off to one side, you've got to go one up before you can go to the other side too. So already, this is pretty powerful. The downside though is you run out of how far you're able to build very quickly. So you can see I can't go any farther than this, and I can't even make it square, right? Because I can't get to any of this area. This is kind of the limit of how far I can get this thing to go. Now, the way you can kind of get around that is you can build additional pillars. That's kind of the answer, or at least one answer. But there's another approach that you can do, and that's that you can build support beams, or start extending it upward. You see, by the act of me putting that little block right there next to the pillar, that gives me the option to continue building outward even more. And of course, you can build all sorts of crazy things like this, just like you can with overhangs. Sky is kind of the limit of ridiculous things that you can build, as you can tell by this. Doesn't really make any sense, but the game is happy to let you do it. Taking advantage of this, I would like to build a skyscraper out of dirt. The second thing I want to take advantage of here is properties of irrigation. Irrigation from water has no limit when it goes down hills. So what I mean by that is, let's say that I did have this really tall irrigated tower all the way up here. And I've got, platforms that are below with dirt. If way at the top of the map, this little square here is irrigated, it will definitely irrigate everything else below it for free because it's connected through this one pillar of dirt. Everything below it, not a problem. So if I build like a giant skyscraper of dirt, as long as I make a pond on the roof, I'm basically guaranteed that the entire building will be irrigated. So that's kind of the plan. I want to take advantage of those. And I think since I don't have a ton of space here, what I'd like to do is maybe start working in this lake area. I'm going to start filling in some of the lake. That way I can reclaim the land, build the tower, and then maybe we can start eating into the farmland that we've got. And you'll notice that I'm keeping at least this little stretch as is. And that's because eventually I'm going to keep that around for a river. We've got a lot of dirt stockpiled, so hopefully we can fill in this foundation pretty quick. And of course, I had to pick the deepest part of this lake to fill in. So we've got at least the start of this filled in. We might actually have to fill in more of this in a little bit. And in preparation of that, maybe we should start tearing out a couple of these trees just in case. That's because I'm figuring that this side of the map is going to be very much like a grid city. And so this is going to be a boulevard going through, and I think I'll just put water underneath it to keep things irrigated. But we need to see how much space this building will take, so we can always extend that if we want. But let's get down to the fun part. Let's figure out how we're going to build this thing. So my plan is to make this building very grid-like and square. I want to just kind of get a hang of what I can pull off with this 3D dirt. So I'm thinking that I'm going to create basically 9 pillars like this, taking it up high enough that we could put trees underneath, and then we could just fill in everything here. That looks kind of like a bug. That's kind of odd the way that filled in. You'll notice I've got a problem here, and that's that I've got these holes the way this is set up. Now, I could put these pillars closer, but I'm going to lose a lot of space for trees. I think instead what I'm going to do is build some support beams, using kind of that trick I was showing earlier in the episode, where if I were to build something like here and here, that should make these two be considered foundations for these. So that'd be 1, 2, 3 away. I should now be able to fill these in. Perfect. And I might have done some of this wrong with the arrows here. I'm not sure if I've pushed myself into an uncompletable corner. We'll see. Okay, that will be our first round of dirt. The other thing I'm kind of wondering is, I really wish I had more dirt if this is going to be a very, very heavy dirt construction. You can see I've got 3 dirt excavators, but they are in full swing. The downside, though, is that they are just chewing through our population. You know, I've got 43 injured beavers, which is pretty ridiculous considering our population is 243. So that's almost a fifth of our population is being chewed up by these things. That is a really big argument for having bots. So I might cave in a later episode to maybe put bots in our industrial zone just to save these poor beavers. And you know, looking at this, I'm thinking we can take this to the top of the map, but I want more real estate than that. If I look just by volume, even if I do a lot of floors, it might replicate all these trees, but I want to go even further. Maybe I can make like a structure with 2 wings. So if I were to build more over here, yeah, something like this. So I think this would be like a central atrium, and then I can replicate another set of 9 pillars here. Yeah, I like that. And then maybe the central atrium could be where I put the elevator access point and stuff like that. I think, again, I'm going to need to pull off some of those support trusses to get everything filled in. And constructing this dirt is going to be kind of a pain vertical-wise. A technique I used earlier for when I was building the powerhouse was to make basically vertical scaffolding all the way at the top using tubeways. I think I should do that again. I've got like an access point right here. I think that would work perfect, especially if we're going to go up super high. How high can we go up? Yeah, all the way up there. Perfectly ridiculous. Let's see, could I pull off something like this to give me good coverage for everything? This construction technique is perfectly ridiculous, but it kind of works. Okay, yeah, that will work. And it gives my beavers something to do while we're waiting for all that dirt to be mined, as I continue to chew through my population. I'm expecting this to take a little bit to get the scaffolding in place, and more or less, unfortunately, to get all the dirt excavated. Now, there is something that I've been kind of not paying a lot of attention to that we might have to soon, and that's our dam supply. You noticed we're in a bad tide right now, and we're getting to the point where we're actually almost emptying out our dam during our droughts. So we might actually have to start investing soonish to extend our water supply a little bit more. I've always considered this water supply in here to be kind of like a temporary measure too, because what I would really like to do is build kind of like our Empire State Building, our giant water tower in the middle of this aqueduct to go way up high to the top of the map too. The only thing that's been kind of holding me back is I want to make sure I have enough resources to complete it. But if we end up with a lot more droughts like this, it might be kind of a forcing function to build kind of that water tower, like literal tower made out of water. We'll see. I'm going to keep an eye on this next drought to see if it's long, in which case I might have to invest in it in this episode. For the moment, though, I don't want to distract from our scaffolding, so let's get all of that done first, and we'll see. I'll just keep an eye on this in the background. And there is floor 1, looking very blocky and very dead. That's the one downside with this construction. Until I get high enough that I can put kind of a pond in, it's just gonna be dead. With our first wing of the first floor done, it's looking pretty good. But I'd like to get kind of the shape of the second wing of this building set up too. Unfortunately, that's probably gonna mean filling in more of this lake. And you can see I've already prepped filling out this river here just so I could make space for it. Yeah, dirt is going to be the limiting resource for this one. That is the one downside with this construction compared to the others. I'm just kind of moving my bottleneck around from being logs over to dirt. But now that we kind of know the shape that we're going for, it should be pretty easy to build this. I'm just going to try to be a little bit mindful of the build order of all that dirt to make sure I don't mess anything up. Now, as they start laying down the dirt, the other part I want to figure out is an elevator system. So if you can imagine that this is all going to be filled with trees as we go up, I want easy access for the forester as well as the lumberjacks. And the idea is that they can take the elevator and one forester could maybe service multiple floors. So let's figure out the elevator. I think we're going to have to be a little tricky here because the forester can't fit in each of these areas, right? So if I'm going to have foresters for this tree farm, I think I'm going to have to kind of tack it onto the side on like a balcony. And I think I'm going to do the same with our two-way station too. So here's what I had in mind. I'm going to have maybe an entryway coming over here into the building. Then maybe something over on the side here, which is where the forester is going to be. And here's where I have to be very kind of tricky. So we're going to have some two-way. This is going to be our elevator. And then once it gets up high enough, to the next story, we're going to have our next drop off to the station, but here we can't put anything for our forester because its tower is in the way. We're just going to shift it. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of stagger the foresters left and right as we go up this tower. So you can imagine that this forester would look like that, and now this elevator shaft would look like this. So now we've got access to the second floor, and we can kind of repeat this as we go up to each of the stories. Now, we don't need the foresters just yet, so I'll keep those on standby, but we can probably use some of this technique to build upward as we want. So some of our cranes, maybe we don't have to rely on it quite as much. I can see our elevator going in, but we are still just really hit by that bottleneck of dirt. I really don't want to do this, but I think we're going to have to pay the cost of building more dirt excavators. And I think where I could potentially build this is right over in front of our power plant. I don't really want to do this because I have long-term plans for this kind of ditch that we made last episode. But for now, I think we can use up all the accumulated planks that we've built, maybe just kind of connect over into the power plant and just line this entire ditch with a bunch of excavators. This is probably going to be a disaster for the beaver's health. I'm expecting the injured population to just skyrocket. Kind of expensive, but otherwise that's going to boost us from 3 excavators to a total of 8, which if we don't completely decimate our beaver population, should hopefully cut some of the construction time for these towers in half. All those are looking good, and I'm going to set them all to, unfortunately, high priority and prioritized by builders. The good news, though, is that while those were built, we should be able to continue on with our dirt building, and starting to fill in the next floor. In fact, what I might do with some of this construction is start building the scaffolding and go up as high as I can and then fill in the floors later, since that seems to be kind of this, like the expensive part. And as long as I build it right, even if there's like a little tiny pole here, that's going to be enough to power the irrigation. Like this, for example, I know would be our foundation that way. Oh, interesting. And okay, here's something I didn't anticipate. There's a natural block limit height to dirt. So these towers I'm coming up with, they can't go higher than here. I forgot about that. I had been assuming that that restriction would have been removed with 3D dirt. Well, I guess that means that we're only going to get 4 stories out of this. You know, it's not a complete waste, but I was hoping for more. Well, I do have other options I could put up there. You know, once I'm up that high, maybe I could put the actual chopped logs up on the roof in the process area, because I don't think there's any limit on those. Well, if that's the case, if I can't end up going as high as I really wanted, at least it's going to be a lot cheaper. I might as well just start filling in the scaffolding for everything. It's not going to be as expensive as I was fearing. And a bunch of kind of tedious laying down blocks later, and we've got the outline of our building. It does feel very odd to be building with dirt, but I have to say it does lend itself to actually making these kind of geometrical shapes. Like, that is the one downside with overhangs, because you can't make them symmetrical unless you kind of use these metal overhangs, which don't always quite line up. But let's see if this works. I think I'm going to give, now that I've got all this dirt coming in, let's do a little time lapse, finish it up, and then maybe we can start seeing if we can irrigate things. And in only a couple days, we're making pretty good progress. But I want to point out a couple interesting things here. First, you'll notice that I built myself into a little bit of a corner here. So we know one part of the game allows you to build things below the building point. So for example, the fact that I have a beaver standing here allows them to build stuff below. But something that's different with dirt compared to our regular buildings is that dirt acts as kind of a barrier between access. So you can see what happened is I built the scaffolding and the beavers finished the top kind of grid pattern here. And because they finished that top grid, they can't build this anymore, even though that is directly in the line of sight. So if this was a levee up here, perfectly fine. The fact that this is dirt, no go. So actually, in order to build these, I would need to actually dynamite some of this cross beams here to get access to it. Probably the easier thing for me right now is more of what I'm doing over here, which is I'm actually building the contents of the floor. So you can see as the beavers get access, they can walk across and then build it and then get those cross beams. That's probably the better play, especially since I notice we've got a lot more dirt now. That's a sign to me that we've moved the bottleneck for construction somewhere else. That said, let's just go ahead and get some of the floors in here. I think once they get built, we'll be able to get the last little bits of scaffolding, and then we can get on to the actual tree farm part. And there is our dirt tower. We've got a few holes here and there to patch up, but I think it's time to see if this is actually going to work. I'm curious to see if we're going to be able to irrigate with this, and then we should be able to actually start planting trees in here. So by volume, I'm curious to see if this is going to be worth it. If you can imagine, we've got 5 stories of this. So if we look at the top, imagine 5 of these stacked out by volume. You know, that probably should be enough to replace all our tree farms in one area. In fact, we'll also have the option to extend this. This part of the map really isn't that useful. I could just stack probably another row in here, maybe in another 2, and just make this all one giant tree farm. That one giant building should be more than enough for all the farming that we're going to need. But I want to actually test it. I want to make sure that this irrigation works the way I expect it to. So let's go all the way up here and try something like this. So this should be dead center right there. And now I'm going to have somebody come and dump water into this. Fluid dumps are a building that I probably should use more of. I always lean too heavily into automating water distribution with, pipes and everything else. But I think for something like this is way more efficient. So we'll get these levees built real quick, and we'll see if this water actually works. Well, look at that. And just even from that little tiny bit of water, that has pretty good reach. All those floors perfectly irrigated. And wow, it actually goes all the way over here. That's a bigger reach than I was expecting. So I was expecting to have 2 of these water towers on both sides. But one of these, look at how far that is. I bet if I were to extend this in this direction, I could build one of those right here, and that would cover the entire tower. I'm going to start queuing up an extension to it. I think I will build out the rest of the space I can here, and then we can just kind of never have to farm trees anywhere else in the rest of the map. Just, it'll be needed for decoration, I guess, but not for anything practical. So let's queue up a bunch of stuff. I think what I can do is queue up the building of this, and then start actually filling the rest in with trees while we've got time. So we'll just pull out everything that I can here, lay out kind of the organization for the scaffolding going up, And I'll put in the floors last, just so I don't run into that same problem I did last time. The only downside of working with dirt is this construction part is a little bit tedious. I think it's a little bit easier if I place things down and then you can kind of click and drag to build them all at once. Helps at least a little bit, because I need to build a lot of pillars. And in the future, I might mix up some of this design choice. I'm going with a straight up grid because I want it to look like a tower, but there is a lot of things that you could do with 3D dirt. And I think for some variety at least, I'm not going to make this one go all the way to the top. I don't want everything in this map just looking like a giant cube. That is another very expensive construction, but we've got a lot of dirt stockpiled, plus we've got a lot of machines running for it. While they get started on that though, I think there's a couple of things we can do to start prepping this land for tree farms. I think one of the things I haven't done a great job is actually connecting everything. And I think I also should have some lumberjacks in here. I'm thinking I could just stick them very close to the tubeway. And you see, that's very intentional on my part with this design. I want everything as close to the tubeway station as I possibly can get it. And that has the nice benefit that it gives a lot of reusable access to all the lumberjacks and all the foresters to cover all of this space, because they really end up overlapping a lot of this area. Next up will be the trees. I've got all these construction roads kind of in the way, but for whatever we can get access to, let's go ahead and place those trees down. I figure I'm going to be back here later to tear out all those roads. I have to say, this is a very weird construction. The one thing I am happy about with this design, though, is that I'm not hiding everything from the sun. With the outside of this building kind of open to the sky, at least, you can say that the trees do get light. And constructing with dirt just looks very different now with the overhangs. And with all those floors taken care of, I'm just going to rearrange that water tower in the top. The most important part here is the center pillar. So as long as that is irrigated by a 3x3 pond, I think that's going to pretty much irrigate everything. So I'm wondering if I can get away with just like a very tiny structure kind of sticking off of the end here. So looking at that, this should be the middle. So as long as that is the middle of whatever structure I come up with, we might be able to get all of this building irrigated at once. So let's see if this is going to work. Now, unfortunately, we are increasingly running into a worker shortage. And a lot of that's really coming from the dirt excavators. They have a lot more jobs, but they're also still injuring a lot of beavers. So now that this construction is finishing up, I will probably pause them so we can hopefully get some more workers over here. But in the meantime, we should have somebody coming in through the pipes, delivering some water, and we're going to be able to see if this irrigation is going to work. And really, to make sure that he's not spending all that time walking back and forth, I should probably throw in like a really tiny container of water here. But with the water that is there, that is looking very promising. Yeah, I can see that this got green all the way. So that means we don't need this one on the side anymore. It can be cleaned up. It's okay if that water floods. And, you know, I think this means that this building is basically good to go. I think all I need to do is run through here, delete all these random roads that were built for construction, and I can fill in everything with trees. And just looking at that, I think this is going to be enough trees for the rest of the game. I don't think we're going to need any other tree farms than this. I mean, just kind of take a look at this, at the expanded view. And compare that to the area that we had supporting trees before. Yeah, that one tower is more than everything we've probably already got. With all this work, though, we don't need these cranes anymore, so I'm going to clean them up. And with the trees finally starting to be planted, I think it's time to turn our attention to something new. You see, now that we've got all these trees, I want someplace to store them. And for that, I think I need a giant, massive storage tower. So here's what I kind of had in mind. I'm thinking that I'm going to have some storage tower right in proximity here, so I have a bunch of places where I can drop off those trees, and then maybe I could use part of that storage facility for food storage. And then we're eventually going to get another one of these towers for food supplies. So this tower will probably not have processed goods, but it's going to just be like a ton of raw agricultural goods for storage. So I will never need anything ever again. I'm thinking of extending in this direction, which unfortunately is a place where a bunch of trees are, as well as more of the tube network. But that should be fine, because we've got all sorts of replacement trees now. I don't really need these. So let's mark all of these for deforestation. And at least for now, let's reroute our traffic through a bypass. Now, before I disconnect this tube network, it is the one that's servicing our tree farm. So I don't want to take our elevator out of commission. So I'm just going to connect over to the tube network over here. And with that taken care of, all of this could go. Now, for the length of this building, I'm thinking of it being almost like a city block, like this building. Maybe not as wide, but that's going to mean it's going to come down here somewhere, which unfortunately means I'm going to have to start moving into this river. Not a super fan of doing that, but we can just kind of shift it, I think, for now. All that taken care of, let's get down to the building part. Now, for the storage facility, what I've been thinking is I just want a record number of industrial piles. And I'm going to basically fill up this entire kind of city block with them. The one trick with this design, though, is I want to make sure that there's not too many redundant roads or staircases or things like that. Because I know late game, that's going to start causing havoc for me, especially with frame rates. So I'm wondering if I could do kind of a variation of what we got over here. Because right now, a height of 4 seems to be the ideal height for a tubeway station. And what I'm going to do is maybe have a stack of 4 high of these serviced by one elevator. Then after that, we're technically entering a new floor, and is the only way to get access to the next kind of set of storage containers via another elevator station. That way I'm reducing how many times the roads are overlapping. Like each kind of grid or section is self-contained. I just need to come up with kind of a nice layout for it. And I'm thinking the pattern is going to be a little bit like this. So this is going to be our new city block dimension for kind of this row. And it doesn't look like much, but all I've done is stack all these towers up. The key part, I think, of this design is how I'm going to get access to each of the different floors. Because again, I want to minimize how many redundant stairwells I've got. So what I'm kind of thinking is I'm going to have a central staircase depending on what wing you want to go to. And this wing is only going to be for this level of our skyscraper. With each subfloor within this floor that the stair goes up, it's going to branch between the north and the south. And then after that, it's going to continue straight up until the next layer. So you can see I get this very nice branching factor, and there's no redundancy in any of the paths. It's kind of basically like it branches of a tree. I've got one path going in, and it just kind of fractorally spans out. I don't know if this will work and save my performance late game, but we're going to see. There we go, like that. So the idea is I'm just going to repeat that exact same pattern on the other side too. And now to figure out the second story. I think I'm going to have to resort to overhangs somehow here. And actually we're lucky. For some reason I thought that the tubeways needed 4 clearance, but it looks like it's actually only 2. So these floors are going to be a little bit more scrunched down than that one. So if that is the case, I can go ahead and get rid of this last staircase. Because I don't want duplicate access to the same thing. Because what I'll do is just add more elevators. The faster you can get to the wing that you need, the better. And we can just make sure that they've got access to that last one. Okay, I like that. So that means we're just going to have to repeat the same process all the way up. And let's start with this ridiculous monstrosity. Kind of taking to calling this like a fractal storage, just with the way that I've organized each of these floors. This is probably the biggest storage facility I've made so far. I think the most tedious part is going to be to go through it and visit each one of these and set them to store logs. And before I forget, I should probably have some imposing monuments at the front. Nice thing about building with industrial piles is that they're pretty cheap and quick to build. And the result is I've got more log storage than I'm ever possibly going to use. Like, we are definitely going to fill this. I just don't know if I can empty it while building something. I think we still have a lot of opportunity to go up, though. So I'm not going to do this yet, but I think from this point forward, I would switch these floors over to using basically large warehouses. So the next layers going up, they're probably going to be for food. And I'll make a different warehouse somewhere else to be one that would store like processed goods or stuff for manufacturing over here. But this is really going to be agricultural storage. But I think I'm going to save that for another episode. Before we start storing massive supplies of food, we're going to need to definitely up our agricultural game. Because right now, our beavers basically have corn. And so I think probably for next episode, we're going to visit how to get rid of all our farmland and turn it into something stackable like this. But otherwise, I think we accomplished a lot here. We've got this massive tree farm that's going to let me tear out all of our existing tree farms and all this new kind of fractal storage going on. And I think we're slowly starting to look more and more like a city, which I'm all for. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I hope to catch you next time.